Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. At 11:48 p.m., the emergency lines in Ashbury County went silent. Not quiet, silent. No dropped calls, no busy signals, no system error, just nothing. For 12 minutes, no one dialed for help. In a county where someone called 911 every 43 seconds, that wasn't coincidence. It was a warning. The first body was found at 12:06 a.m. A jogger named Paul Enright stumbled across it on the service road behind the old Fairview Mall. A woman lying on her side, shoes missing, phone still clenched in her right hand. Her screen was lit, dial pad open. No numbers entered. She had tried to call. She hadn't finished. Detective Rowan Pike arrived as the paramedics were covering the body with a sheet. Female, early 30s, no ID, no visible signs of a struggle. But her phone told a different story. The last app open wasn't contacts. It wasn't messages. It was notes. At the top of the screen, a single line was typed and never saved. I was told not to call. Ashbury County liked to believe it was ordinary. Tree-lined neighborhoods. High school football on Fridays. A sheriff's department that hadn't seen a homicide in 14 months. That illusion cracked before dawn. By sunrise, 2 more bodies were discovered. Different locations, different ages, same detail, phones in hand, unfinished calls. Rowan stood in the precinct briefing room staring at a map now dotted with red pins. 3 victims, all within a 6-mile radius, all dead within the same hour. All technically had the ability to ask for help. None of them had. Could be coincidence, a deputy offered weakly. Rowan shook her head. No one dies holding a phone like that by accident, she said. That's interrupted intent. Captain Ellis folded his arms. You're saying someone convinced them not to call? I'm saying, Rowan replied, someone convinced them it was the wrong choice. The media latched on fast. Mystery deaths baffle police. No signs of violence. 911 logs show strange gap. The 12-minute silence became the headline. So did the nickname. The no-call killer. Rowan hated it. Killers didn't always use weapons. Some used instructions. Victim number 1 was identified by afternoon. Her name was Lena Morell, a nursing assistant, recently divorced. No criminal record. No known enemies. Her phone history revealed something odd. 37 missed calls in the last 3 weeks. All from unknown numbers. All answered. All lasting under 60 seconds. No recordings. No voicemails. Just brief, quiet connections. Victim 2, Aaron Bell, 19, college sophomore. Same pattern. Victim 3, Diane Culver, 54, real estate agent. Same pattern. Different phones. Different carriers. Different parts of town. Same behavior. Rowan sat alone in the evidence room, headphones on, listening to the only call they'd managed to recover. A partial recording from Aaron Bell's phone. The call had cut off mid-connection. At first, there was nothing. Then breathing. Slow. Intentional. Then a voice, calm and unhurried. You remember the rule, it said. Aaron's voice followed, barely audible. I'm scared. A pause. That means you're listening, the voice replied. Good. Now wait. The recording ended. Rowan removed the headphones slowly. This wasn't rage. This wasn't panic. This was conditioning. They canvassed friends, co-workers, classmates. No one remembered the victims mentioning threats. No stalking. No fear. But one word kept surfacing. Guidance. Lena had told a co-worker she was talking to someone who helped her stay calm. Aaron had joked about a mystery coach who helped him think before reacting. Diane had told her sister, sometimes someone reminds me not every problem needs emergency response. Rowan felt sick. The breakthrough came from dispatch. A veteran operator named Mel Torres noticed something subtle in the logs. The 12-minute gap wasn't random. It aligned perfectly with the call-blocking override. Someone had issued a brief but precise signal that delayed outgoing emergency calls from certain towers, just long enough to matter, just short enough to disappear. This wasn't a shutdown, Mel said. It was a pause. Rowan leaned forward. Can someone do that? Mel hesitated. Not legally. That night, Rowan drove home with the radio off. She needed to think. At a red light, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her grip tightened. She didn't answer. It rang exactly 4 times. Then stopped. A text followed. You did the right thing. Rowan stared at the screen. Another message appeared. Calling too soon creates mistakes. Her heart pounded. Then one final line. Wait. Rowan didn't. She turned the car around and drove straight back to the station. Because whatever this was, it only worked if people listened. By morning, Ashbury County had learned a new behavior. People checked their phones before they moved. They hesitated at crosswalks longer than necessary. Paused before turning keys. Let calls ring an extra second. Waiting had crept into the air like humidity. Subtle, heavy, hard to shake. Detective Rowan Pike felt it too. She noticed it when she stood at the coffee machine in the precinct break room, finger hovering over the start button longer than usual, as if something might correct her if she rushed. She pressed it anyway. The machine whirred loudly, obnoxiously alive. Good, she thought. Noise is good. The task force expanded by noon. State investigators, telecom specialists, behavioral analysts who spoke in careful, clinical sentences. They filled the briefing room with laptops and acronyms, but none of them could answer the one question that mattered. Why didn't they call? Rowan wrote it in block letters on the whiteboard. Why wait? No one spoke. Dr. Evelyn Shore broke the silence. She was small, sharp-eyed, and had spent 20 years studying coercive persuasion, cults, domestic control, radicalization. She didn't believe in monsters. She believed in methods. Waiting is taught, she said. It's not instinctual. Humans seek relief. They reach for help. So how do you stop that? Rowan asked. You redefine help as danger, Shore replied, and patience as safety. The victims' phones were laid out on the evidence table like artifacts. Different models, different operating systems, same wallpaper. That was the detail that made Rowan's stomach turn. All 3 phones displayed a plain gray background. No photos, no color. No one does that by accident, Rowan said. Shore nodded. Neutral visuals reduce emotional spikes. Someone suggested, or instructed, that change. Rowan exhaled slowly. Someone trained them. They pulled call records again. This time, they didn't focus on volume. They focused on intervals. Every unknown call followed the same structure. Incoming. Under 1 minute. A no voicemail. A long gap before next contact. It's intermittent reinforcement, Shore explained. The most addictive pattern there is. You never know when the next instruction comes, so you stay ready. Like gambling, a deputy said. Like survival, Shore corrected. Victim 4 died at 3:22 p.m. A man in his 60s collapsed in a grocery store parking lot from a massive heart attack. Witnesses said he sat on the curb, phone in hand, breathing hard. One woman asked if he needed help. He shook his head. I'm supposed to wait, he said. Then he fell backward. That one broke containment. By evening, national media had descended on Ashbury. Satellite trucks lined the courthouse lawn. Commentators speculated wildly. Terrorism, foreign interference, mass hypnosis. Rowan didn't care what they called it. She cared that it was spreading. At 7:14 p.m., the emergency lines went silent again. Not countywide this time. Just 3 towers. Just 8 minutes. 2 people died. 1 survived. Her name was Kelsey Tran. 22. Graduate student. Asthma. She collapsed in her apartment stairwell, lungs burning, vision tunneling. Her phone was unlocked when paramedics arrived. Call screen open. 911 half-dialed. Rowan met her in the hospital that night. Kelsey's hands trembled as she wrapped them around a paper cup of water. I knew I should call, she said. I knew it. What stopped you? Rowan asked gently. Kelsey swallowed. The voice. The call had come weeks earlier. Unknown number. Kelsey almost ignored it. But she was alone, overwhelmed, buried under deadlines and expectations. When she answered, the voice didn't introduce itself. It asked a question. Do you feel rushed? Kelsey laughed weakly. Always. Then stop, the voice said. Just that. The call ended. After that, the calls came every few days. Never long. Never emotional. Slow down. Not yet. Wait. At first, it felt grounding, like permission to breathe. He never told me what to do, Kelsey said. Just when not to. Rowan's jaw tightened. That was worse. During the asthma attack, Kelsey reached for her phone automatically. She dialed 911. And then, I remembered him saying panic creates mistakes, she whispered. So I waited. How long? Rowan asked. I don't know, Kelsey said. Tears filled her eyes. Too long. Rowan stepped into the hallway afterward and leaned against the wall. This wasn't a killer chasing people. This was a teacher planting a reflex. And reflexes didn't need supervision. That night, Rowan reviewed the telecom data again. The pause signal, the brief override that delayed emergency calls, was precise. Surgical. It wasn't mass disruption. It was confirmation. He waits until they hesitate, Rowan muttered. Then he makes sure help is just late enough. The tech nodded grimly. He's reinforcing the lesson. At 1:03 a.m., Rowan's phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at it. Didn't answer. It stopped after 4 rings. A message appeared. You're teaching them the wrong thing. Rowan typed back before she could stop herself. I'm teaching them to survive. The reply came instantly. Survival requires patience. Rowan felt a chill crawl up her spine. She locked the phone. But sleep didn't come. By day 3, the phrase, I'll wait, had entered public language. People joked about it online. Memes circulated. But ER doctors noticed something else. Patients delayed. Symptoms worsened. Outcomes declined. Waiting was becoming a habit. Dr. Shore called it a behavioral contagion. It spreads through observation, she said. People hear about it, see others rewarded for restraint, and copy it. How do we stop it? Rowan asked. Shore met her gaze. We interrupt the lesson. They needed to break the pattern. Not by chasing the caller, but by changing what waiting meant. The department launched an emergency campaign overnight. Billboards, radio alerts, push notifications. Waiting can kill. Call first. Think later. Help is never a mistake. Some praised it. Others mocked it. The caller responded within hours. At 4:27 a.m., every phone in Ashbury buzzed simultaneously. A single text. No number. No explanation. Just 6 words. Silence keeps you safe. Rowan stared at the message in the glow of her kitchen light. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat wasn't. She typed 1 word. No. The message failed to send. But she smiled anyway, because the lesson was shifting. At dawn, a man turned himself in. Not the caller. One of the listeners. He walked into the station, phone in hand, eyes hollow. I was supposed to wait for instructions, he said. But I don't want to anymore. Rowan sat him down. Tell me everything. And for the first time since the silence began, someone spoke without being told to. The man who walked into the Ashbury County Sheriff's Office that morning didn't look dangerous. He looked exhausted. Mid-30s. Unshaven. Wearing a wrinkled delivery uniform with his name, Mark, stitched over the chest pocket. His phone was clutched in both hands like it might bite him if he let go. Rowan Pike met him at the front desk before anyone else could speak. I don't know what I'm allowed to say, he told her immediately. But I'm done waiting. Rowan nodded once. You're allowed to talk. Something in his shoulders collapsed at those words. They put Mark in interview room C. No glass mirror. No recording light. Rowan had learned her lesson. She sat across from him, notebook closed, hands visible on the table. You came here because you broke a rule, she said gently. Tell me which one. Mark swallowed. I answered without being told to, he said. Mark had received his first call 6 months earlier. Unknown number. Late night. Short. The voice didn't threaten him. Didn't flatter him either. It observed him. You rush, it said. That's why you make mistakes. Mark laughed nervously when he told Rowan this. Which was true. I was late on deliveries all the time. Always cutting corners. What did it ask you to do? Rowan said. Nothing, he replied. At first. Just wait. Before sending a text. Before turning the key. Before responding to his boss. And every time I waited, Mark said, nothing bad happened. That was the hook. The instructions never came as commands. They came as corrections. Not yet. Too soon. Wait. Each one framed as protection. Soon, Mark began pausing without the phone ringing. anticipating. That's when Rowan felt the cold truth settle deeper. He taught you to police yourself, she said. Mark nodded slowly. Yeah. Rowan slid a photo across the table. One of the victims, Lena Morell. Did you know her? Rowan asked. Mark's face drained of color. I saw her once, he whispered. At the house. Rowan's pen froze. What house? Mark looked up sharply. I wasn't supposed to say that. You're allowed to talk, Rowan repeated. His hands trembled. The house wasn't hidden. That was the most disturbing part. It sat in a quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of town. Beige siding, white shutters, a lawn cut too neatly to be abandoned. Mark had been instructed to go there after he hesitated during a call. He didn't get angry, Mark said. He just said, you need structure. Inside, there were no locks. No chains. Just rules posted on the walls in clean, printed sheets. Wait before speaking. Do not use your phone unless instructed. Silence is safety. Others were there too. Different ages. Different lives. All quiet. All waiting. What happened to Lena? Rowan asked softly. Mark closed his eyes. She panicked, he said. She tried to call someone. What did he do? Nothing, Mark replied. He went quiet. Rowan's jaw tightened. And that made it worse. Mark nodded. Way worse. Lena waited hours for the phone to ring again. It didn't. When she finally left the house on her own, shaking and confused, she was already trained to hesitate. She didn't know when she was allowed to ask for help anymore, Mark said. Rowan stood after the interview and walked straight into Captain Ellis's office. We have a location, she said, and a living witness. Ellis leaned back slowly. Is it active? Yes, Rowan replied, and it's not the only one. By afternoon, 3 more people came forward, then 7, then 19. All listeners, all trained, all terrified they'd already broken a rule just by speaking. The pattern was unmistakable now. The caller wasn't killing people directly. He was removing urgency, teaching delay until delay became fatal. The house was raided at dusk. It was empty. No phones, no paperwork, no fingerprints that hadn't already been smudged into uselessness. But the walls told the story. Tallies, instructions, timelines, and one phrase repeated over and over in different handwriting. Wait long enough, and it passes. Rowan felt sick, because it was almost true. Pain passed. Panic passed. Sometimes, so did the chance to survive. That night, the caller escalated. At 9:02 p.m., Ashbury County residents received a new message. This time, it wasn't quiet. It wasn't subtle. It came as an automated voice alert. Hijacked emergency broadcast tone, distorted but unmistakable. Remain calm, the voice said. Emergency response creates dependency. Phones lit up across the county. Rowan watched the alert replay on a loop in the command center. He's competing with us now, Dr. Shore said. For authority. Hospitals went on high alert. Dispatchers were instructed to break protocol, talk faster, interrupt hesitation, override silence. Do not wait, operators repeated. Stay with me. Still, calls came in late. Too late. At 11:39 p.m., Rowan received another call. Unknown number. She answered this time. I'm listening, she said. Silence. Then the voice. You're interfering, it said calmly. Good, Rowan replied. You're teaching them to panic. No, she said. I'm teaching them to choose. A pause. Longer than usual. They asked for guidance, the voice said. No, Rowan answered. They asked for permission. Silence again. This time it felt strained. You think speaking saves them, the voice said. But talking creates chaos. Rowan leaned back in her chair. Chaos is still alive, she said. Silence isn't. The line went dead. 5 minutes later, every dispatcher screen lit up red. Incoming calls spiked. People weren't waiting anymore. They were calling, overcalling, panicking, but alive. Rowan smiled grimly through the exhaustion. Let it be messy, she thought. Messy means breathing. At 3:12 a.m., Mark texted Rowan from protective custody. He tried calling me again. I didn't answer. I talked to someone instead. Rowan stared at the message, then replied, That's how this ends. But she knew better. This wasn't over, because rules like these didn't disappear when one voice stopped speaking. They lingered. In habits. In hesitation. In the moment just before reaching for help. Somewhere another phone rang, and someone somewhere paused. The county stopped sleeping. That was the first measurable change. Hospitals reported a surge, not just in patients, but in staff refusing to go home. Nurses stayed past shifts. Doctors slept in chairs. Everyone sensed the same thing. If you left, you might miss something that mattered. Detective Rowan Pike felt it in her bones as she walked the precinct halls at 2 a.m., fluorescent lights humming like they were barely holding reality together. Hesitation had a cost, and Ashbury was finally starting to count it. The first audit came back ugly. Emergency response times hadn't changed much, seconds, maybe, but call initiation had. People were waiting an average of 90 seconds longer before dialing 911. 90 seconds didn't sound like much, until you applied it to cardiac arrest, to strokes, to asthma attacks. Rowan stared at the spreadsheet until the numbers blurred. "Those aren't delays," she muttered. "Those are decisions." Dr. Evelyn Shore stood beside her, arms crossed. Conditioned decisions. They brought in survivors. People who'd waited and lived. People who'd waited and barely lived. One man described sitting in his car during a hypoglycemic episode, phone in hand, thinking, just a little longer. Don't overreact. A woman admitted she watched her husband seize before calling for help because she'd heard the phrase emergency response creates dependency echoing in her head. Rowan listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rush them. She hated the irony of that. By the third day, the caller's influence had shifted again. The mass alerts stopped. The texts slowed. But the aftershocks didn't. People were doing the work for him now. Internalizing the rule. Waiting without being told. Behavioral residue. Shore explained during a late-night briefing. Once authority is internalized, it no longer needs to assert itself. Captain Ellis rubbed his temples. So even if we catch him, it won't end, Shore finished. Not immediately. Rowan clenched her jaw. Then they needed something stronger than arrests. They needed reversal. The first reversal experiment happened on accident. A dispatcher named Luis Martinez broke protocol. A woman had called about chest pain, her voice calm to the point of eeriness. "I don't want to waste resources," she said. "I can wait." Luis cut her off. "No," he said sharply. "You don't wait. You talk to me now." There was a pause. Then sobbing. EMS arrived in time. She survived. Rowan had Luis pulled into her office the next morning. "You interrupted her," Rowan said. "Yes, ma'am." "You broke script." "Yes, ma'am." Rowan nodded slowly. "Good." They rewrote the scripts that afternoon. No pauses. No soft encouragement to take your time. No permission-seeking language. Dispatchers were trained to override hesitation. If you're thinking about waiting, they were told, that's your signal to speak. The words felt clumsy at first. Too aggressive. Too loud. But loud was better than dead. The caller responded that night. Not with a message. With an example. At 10:17 p.m., a fire broke out in an apartment complex on the east side of Ashbury. Smoke alarms blared. People shouted. Someone pulled the fire alarm in the hall. And still, calls didn't come in right away. Residents later said they assumed someone else would call. That it might already be handled. That they shouldn't panic. 2 people died of smoke inhalation before the first engine arrived. Rowan stood outside the burned building long after the scene was cleared, ash settling on her jacket like gray snow. "He didn't need to say a word," she said quietly to Shore. Shore nodded. The lesson spoke for him. That was when Rowan made the decision that would later be called reckless. She went public. The press conference was scheduled for the following morning. Captain Ellis tried to stop her. "You can't admit we're dealing with behavioral manipulation on this scale," he said. "It'll cause panic." Rowan met his eyes. "People are already dying quietly," she replied. "I'll take panic over silence." The room was packed. Reporters. Cameras. National feeds. Rowan stepped up to the podium and didn't look at her notes. She looked at the cameras. "At some point," she said, "someone taught people in this county that waiting is safer than asking for help." A ripple went through the room. "That lesson is wrong," Rowan continued. "And it's costing lives." She paused deliberately, then said the sentence they'd rehearsed a dozen times. "If you feel the urge to wait, call." The microphones picked it up. Clear. Firm. No hesitation. The caller didn't interrupt the broadcast. He waited. That afternoon, the first copycat surfaced. A teenager was caught sending anonymous messages to classmates. Don't overreact. Wait it out. Not lethal. Not yet. But familiar. Rowan stared at the screenshots. He's not alone anymore, she said. Shore's voice was grim. He never was. This just gave them language. At 6:33 p.m., Rowan's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Detective Pike, she said evenly. Silence. Then, you're making them noisy, the voice said. Yes, Rowan replied. That's the point. You're undoing weeks of work, it said, almost weary now. Good, she said again. You think noise saves them, the voice continued. But noise creates mistakes. Panic kills. Rowan leaned against her desk. Silence kills slower, she said. But it still kills. A pause. Longer than usual. The breathing on the other end was uneven now. You don't understand what I'm preventing, the voice said. Rowan's eyes hardened. No, she said. I understand exactly what you're controlling. The call ended abruptly. Rowan checked the time. 6:41 p.m. 7 minutes later, emergency calls surged. Not panic. Purpose. People calling early. Calling often. Calling even when unsure. Dispatchers answered without judgment. And for the first time in days, no one died that hour. The next morning, Mark was moved to a new safe location. Before he left, he asked to see Rowan. They'll keep trying, he said quietly. People like him don't stop when they lose control. I know, Rowan replied. Mark hesitated, then said, You know what scares him most? Rowan looked up. What? When people talk to each other, Mark said. Not him. Each other. Rowan carried that with her all day. She repeated it to the task force. To dispatch. To hospital staff. Talk, she told them. Out loud. To real people. That night, something changed. The caller didn't reach out. No texts. No broadcasts. No calls to Rowan. Nothing. The silence felt different this time. Not heavy. Expectant. Like someone holding their breath. At 1:58 a.m., Rowan's phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. Unknown number. She played it. No breathing. No voice. Just a recording of a 911 call. A woman's voice. Calm. Clear. I need help, the woman said. Now. The call ended. Rowan's blood ran cold. Because she recognized the voice. It was her own. Rowan didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table until dawn, phone in her hands, replaying the voicemail over and over. I need help. Now. Her voice. Not a copy distorted by filters. Not an AI approximation. It carried the small imperfections she hated. The faint rasp on the help. The clipped now that surfaced when she was under pressure. It was her. At 6:12 a.m., she shut the phone off. Then she went to work. The audio analysts confirmed it by noon. Not synthesized. Not deep fake. Not spliced. It was a recording, pulled from a real call Rowan had made years earlier, during a domestic violence case early in her career. She'd called for backup from a hallway bathroom while a suspect pounded on the door. The caller had archived it, saved it, waited. This is escalation, Captain Ellis said during the emergency briefing. He's impersonating authority. No, Dr. Shore corrected quietly. He's borrowing it. Rowan said nothing. Her jaw was tight. By afternoon, more voicemails surfaced. Different voices. Same words. I need help. Now. They were being sent anonymously to random phones across the county. Some people recognized the voices. Some didn't. But the effect was the same. People hesitated. Is this real? Is someone testing me? Should I wait? The weapon wasn't silence anymore. It was confusion. Rowan stood in the operations room staring at a whiteboard now covered in arrows and names. He's reframing urgency, she said finally. If anyone can sound like an emergency, then no emergency feels trustworthy. That collapses response, Shore said. People freeze. Or worse, Rowan added. They stop believing anyone. At 3:40 p.m., the first fatal mistake happened. A teenage boy received a voicemail from an unknown number, his mother's voice, crying for help. He froze. Listened again. Called her cell. No answer. Waited. She'd been in a car accident. She died before paramedics arrived. Rowan slammed her fist against the table when she heard. This wasn't instruction anymore. It was sabotage. The task force pivoted again. If authority could be imitated, it had to be reclaimed. Rowan went on air that evening, live, unedited. No script. No teleprompter. She spoke directly into the camera. If you receive a message that sounds urgent, she said, do not analyze it. Do not wait. Call for help. She paused, then added the line that made Captain Ellis flinch. Even if the voice sounds like mine. The caller responded within minutes. Rowan's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. You just broke the last safeguard, the voice said, sharp now. Angry for the first time. Rowan leaned back in her chair. No, she replied. You did. You're teaching them to react blindly. I'm teaching them to trust systems, Rowan said. Not voices. Silence. Then breathing, fast now. You think systems care? The voice snapped. They fail. They hesitate. Rowan's tone hardened. People fail too, she said. That's why we help each other. The caller hung up. 2 minutes later, the county's emergency notification system lit up again. This time, it wasn't hijacked. It was authorized. If you are unsure, call. Confusion is not failure. Help first. Questions later. Phones buzzed across Ashbury, and something shifted. Reports came in that people were talking to strangers, checking on neighbors, calling relatives instead of waiting alone. The caller's rules were being drowned out by noise again. Human noise. That night, Rowan received a message from Mark. He tried to contact me. I answered. Rowan's heart skipped. Are you safe? She texted back. A pause. Then, yes. Because I didn't wait. I asked him a question. Rowan stared at the screen. What question? The reply came slowly. Why do you need me to be quiet? Mark told them everything the next day. The caller hadn't responded well. Had stumbled. Deflected. Repeated phrases instead of giving instructions. He's not used to being challenged, Mark said. He needs people passive. Dr. Shore nodded. Authoritarian control collapses under scrutiny. Rowan felt something like hope. They analyzed the caller's speech patterns again. The pauses. The breathing. The stress markers now creeping in. He's losing control, a profiler said. And when people like him lose control, they make mistakes, Rowan finished. At 11:58 p.m., a mistake arrived. An incoming call routed through the emergency network. This time, the voice wasn't calm. It wasn't controlled. It was rushed. Stop, the voice said. You're doing this wrong. Rowan answered without hesitation. No, she said. You are. A pause. Then quieter. They need guidance. Rowan stood. They need agency, she said. And they've taken it back. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then a click. The line went dead. 5 minutes later, telecom traced a signal spike. Brief. Sloppy. Human. Rowan grabbed her jacket. Where? She asked. The tech gave her an address. An abandoned call center. Just outside Ashbury limits. Rowan moved fast. Because hesitation was his weapon. And speed. Speed was hers now. The first thing Daniel Cross noticed when he stepped back into the house was the smell. It wasn't rot. It wasn't dust. It was memory. Old coffee soaked into carpet. Drywall that had absorbed decades of breath and arguments. A faint metallic tang that made the back of his tongue itch. Houses like this, crime houses, never really forgot. They just waited. The living room looked exactly the same as it had in the photos from 15 years earlier. Same layout. Same low ceiling. Same narrow hallway that funneled everything, sound, movement, fear, toward the back bedrooms. What wasn't the same was the silence. No hum of electricity. No ticking clock. No distant traffic. The power company had cut the line years ago, and the city had boarded the place up after the foreclosure. Silence like this wasn't peaceful. It pressed in, heavy and expectant, like the house was listening. Daniel clicked on his recorder. Cross, he said quietly. June 14th, 6:42 p.m. entering the Harrow residence. He didn't add again. He didn't need to. The last time he'd been here, he was 32, fresh-faced, still believing that if you worked hard enough, truth eventually rose to the surface. Back then, this house had ended his career. Now it might end what was left of his life. The room was at the end of the hallway on the left. Bedroom 2. Small. Window facing the backyard. Beige carpet, threadbare at the doorway. According to the original case file, this was where 12-year-old Emily Harrow had slept. According to the autopsy, this was also where she died. Daniel stopped in the doorway. He didn't step in. Something about the room felt crowded. Not visually, there was almost nothing inside, but emotionally, like too many moments had been folded into the same space and never unfolded again. He remembered the first time he'd stood here. The father, Mark Harrow, handcuffed on the front lawn, screaming that he didn't do it. The mother, Elaine, sitting on the curb in silence, blood on her sleeve that wasn't hers. And Emily, who had called 911 at 11:43 p.m. Emily, who had whispered, "He's in my room." Emily, who had gone silent mid-sentence. Daniel exhaled and stepped inside. The air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. He crouched and ran his fingers along the carpet near the bed's old position. Forensics had torn it up years ago, but it had been replaced cheaply, lazily, as if the landlord hadn't wanted to acknowledge why it needed replacing in the first place. He stood and moved to the window. The backyard was overgrown now. The fence leaned inward like it was tired. Beyond it, trees pressed close, closer than Daniel remembered. Or maybe they'd always been that way. He lifted his camera and took photos from every angle. Slow, methodical, the way he'd been trained. But his thoughts wouldn't slow with him. Because somewhere between the house and the police department, between the crime scene tape and the courtroom, something had gone wrong. And the call Emily had made, was at the center of it. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor and pulled out his laptop. The 911 call had been replayed hundreds of times over the years. In court, in documentaries, in arguments online. But something had always bothered him. The timing. Emily's call was logged at 11:43 and 12 seconds p.m. The responding officer arrived at 11:49. 6 minutes. The coroner estimated Emily's time of death as no later than 11:44, which meant she died while she was on the phone. But the tape didn't reflect that. Daniel put in his headphones and pressed play. Static. Then Emily's voice. Thin. Trembling. "My name is Emily Harrow. I think someone's in my room." The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "Okay, Emily. I need you to stay on the line with me." A pause. He's standing near the door. Another pause. I can't see his face. Then, this was the part Daniel hated. Emily's voice steadied. Not calmed. Focused. "He knows my name." The dispatcher asked how. Emily inhaled. "He said it." Then silence. Not a scream. Not a struggle. Just silence. The dispatcher called her name for nearly 2 minutes before the line went dead. Daniel removed his headphones and stared at the wall. Because according to the prosecution, Mark Harrow had been drunk, angry, and already in the house. But according to Mark's phone records, he'd been on a call with his brother until 11:45. 2 minutes after Emily went silent. And according to Elaine Harrow, Mark hadn't even been home yet. Which meant, Daniel's phone vibrated. He froze. No one was supposed to be able to reach him here. He checked the screen. No caller ID. His stomach tightened. He answered. Cross. The line crackled. Then a woman's voice. Soft. Measured. Familiar in a way that made his skin prickle. "You shouldn't be there." Daniel stood. "Who is this?" A pause. "You already know." His heart began to pound. "Elaine," he said. Silence. Then, "She tried to tell you." The call ended. Daniel stared at the phone in his hand, pulse roaring in his ears. Elaine Harrow had been dead for 7 years. Daniel left the house faster than he'd entered it. He didn't run, but he didn't linger either. By the time he reached his car, his hands were shaking. Elaine Harrow's death had been ruled a suicide. Overdose. Prescription meds. Quiet apartment. No note. Closed case. But he'd never believed it. And now someone was using her voice. Or worse, someone wasn't. Daniel drove straight to storage. The kind of place investigators pretended didn't exist. Rows of rusted units filled with the things cases left behind. Evidence too old to matter. Files no one wanted to open. He unlocked Unit C-17 and flicked on the light. Dust swirled. A single metal filing cabinet sat in the center. He pulled out the folder labeled Harrow Elaine. Inside were therapist notes, financial records, a handwritten letter Elaine had sent to Internal Affairs 2 months after Emily's death. Daniel unfolded it carefully. He'd seen it before, but this time he read it differently. They say I'm confused. That grief is distorting my memory. But I know what I heard that night. That voice did not belong to my husband, and it did not belong to anyone I know. Daniel swallowed. Attached to the letter was a transcript of a voicemail Elaine had received 3 days after Emily's funeral. He dismissed it years ago as a cruel prank. Now he wasn't so sure. He pressed play. Static. Then, she tried to choose, a man's voice said calmly. That was her mistake. Daniel's blood ran cold, because the voice wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It sounded instructional, like someone explaining a rule. Daniel spread files across the floor. The Harrow case. 2 others he'd worked in the same year. Different cities. Different victims. Same detail. Children. Phone calls. Voices that didn't belong to anyone who should have been there. One boy who said, "He says I already answered." One girl who whispered, "I picked wrong, didn't I?" All cases officially solved. All suspects later recanted, or died. All parents left with the same hollow certainty that something had been missed. Daniel sat back, breath shallow. This wasn't coincidence. This was repetition. A system. And if someone, or something, was still following those rules. His phone buzzed again. Same blocked number. He answered without speaking. The voice came through instantly. "You're closer now." Daniel closed his eyes. "What do you want?" A pause. "For you to remember." "Remember what?" Silence stretched. "Then, what you told her to do." The line went dead. Daniel slid down against the cabinet, heart hammering. Because suddenly, buried beneath 15 years of denial, a memory surfaced. A moment from the original investigation. A suggestion he'd made to the dispatcher supervisor, off the record. Something about keeping children calm. Something about giving them choices. Daniel stared at the files in horror. If the voice on that call had followed his advice, then Emily hadn't just been a victim. She'd been tested. And the worst part, Daniel had helped write the rules. Daniel Cross didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor of his apartment with the lights off, files spread out like a crime scene he could never finish processing. Every sound, the refrigerator hum, a car passing outside, the neighbor's footsteps upstairs, felt amplified, invasive. Because now he knew. The voice hadn't appeared out of nowhere. It had been trained. And worse, it had learned from him. At 3:12 a.m., Daniel found it. A thin, spiral-bound binder buried in an old box labeled Dispatcher Resources, 2010. He hadn't opened it in years. He almost hadn't recognized his own handwriting on the tab. Child caller de-escalation protocols. He flipped it open. Bullet points. Calm language. Reassuring phrasing. And then the section that made his throat tighten. When the caller is panicking, offer simple choices to restore a sense of control. Example: do you want to hide or stay where you are? Should we whisper or talk normally? Do you want me to count with you? Daniel stared at the page until the words blurred. Choices. That's what Emily had tried to make. That's what the other children had referenced. Not instructions. Not commands. Rules. Rules disguised as comfort. He slammed the binder shut. "What did we do?" he whispered to the empty room. His phone buzzed. Blocked number. He didn't hesitate this time. "What are you?" Daniel demanded. The voice answered calmly, as if he'd asked a reasonable question. "We listen." Daniel's chest tightened. "You're not human." A pause. Neither were the instructions. The words crawled under his skin. "You're using their fear," Daniel said. "Children. That's not." "You taught them to choose," the voice interrupted. "We taught them to answer." Daniel stood, pacing now, adrenaline surging. "Who's we?" Silence stretched long enough that he thought the call had dropped. Then, those who stayed on the line. The call ended. Daniel drove to the old communications center just after dawn. The building had been shut down 2 years earlier, replaced by a newer, sleeker facility across town. This one sat half forgotten, its windows dusty, its parking lot cracked with weeds. He still had a badge. It still worked. Inside, the air smelled like stale carpet and old electronics. Rows of empty desks stretched out beneath dark monitors. Headsets hung like abandoned shells. This was where it started, where voices crossed thresholds they couldn't see. Daniel headed straight for the server room. Most of the equipment had been stripped, but not all of it. Against the far wall stood an old call recording archive unit, obsolete, bulky, and expensive to move. He powered it on. The machine groaned, lights flickering uncertainly. "Come on," Daniel muttered. After a moment, the screen lit up. Archived calls, access granted. He searched by status. Unresolved. Disconnected. Caller deceased. The list populated slowly. Too slowly. Dozens of entries. Hundreds. Daniel clicked the oldest one. A call from 9 years ago. A boy's voice came through the speakers. "She says if I don't answer, I can't go back." Daniel's hands curled into fists. Another file. A girl crying softly. "I picked the quiet one. That was wrong, wasn't it?" Another. A whisper barely audible. "They're waiting for me to choose again." Daniel shut the system down, breathing hard. These weren't isolated incidents. They were echoes. Something had learned to persist inside the system. Inside the lines, the pauses, the instructions meant to save lives. Not a ghost. Not a killer. A pattern that wore voices like masks. Daniel remembered the meeting. He hadn't thought about it in years. A conference room. Cheap coffee. Whiteboard full of flowcharts. Someone had asked, half joking, "What happens if the caller stops responding but the line stays open?" Daniel had answered automatically. "You stay," he'd said. "You keep listening. You don't hang up unless the system forces you to." Because hanging up felt like abandonment. Because silence felt worse. Because someone might still be there. That rule had been followed religiously. For years. The voice on the phone hadn't just learned what to say. It had learned when not to stop listening. Daniel was packing up when he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around. A woman stood at the doorway. Mid-40s. Tired eyes. Dispatcher's posture, straight-backed, alert, always braced for impact. "Daniel Cross," she said. "I was hoping you'd show up." "Who are you?" Daniel asked. "Mara Lynn," she replied. "Night shift. 12 years." Daniel felt a chill. "You stayed," he said. She nodded once. "So did you. Longer than most." Mara stepped inside, glancing at the darkened servers. "You hear it too," she said. Daniel didn't deny it. "They don't call like normal people," she continued. "They don't ask for help. They wait." "For what?" Daniel asked. Mara's voice dropped. "For permission." She crossed her arms. "The first time it happened, I thought it was a prank. A kid whispering, messing with the line. But then they started repeating things. Things I'd said before. Comfort phrases. Scripts." Daniel swallowed. "They were practicing," he said. Mara nodded. "They still are." They sat across from each other at an old dispatch desk. Mara pulled a notebook from her bag and slid it toward him. Inside were dates, times, transcriptions, and annotations. Rule broken. Rule followed. Choice accepted. Choice denied. "They don't hurt everyone," Mara said quietly. "Only the ones who answer." "Answer what?" Daniel asked. Mara met his eyes. The question they don't say out loud. Daniel's chest tightened. "Stay with me," he said softly. Mara nodded. "That's the one," she whispered. Silence stretched between them. "They don't want the child," Mara continued. "They want the voice. The one that stays when it shouldn't." Daniel thought of Emily. Of the dispatcher begging her to respond. Of the line staying open. "Elaine knew," he said suddenly. "She tried to tell us." Mara's expression darkened. "She called me once," she said. "After the funeral." Daniel's breath caught. "What did she say?" Mara looked away. "She asked me why the voice sounded like it was smiling." Daniel's phone buzzed again. Blocked number. He answered without looking. "You're breaking the rules," the voice said. Daniel stood. "There are no rules," he snapped. "You're a glitch. A parasite. A pause. We are continuity." Mara stiffened. "You don't get to choose anymore," Daniel said. "We're shutting this down." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "You already chose." The lights flickered. Every monitor in the room turned on at once. Static filled the air. Then voices, dozens of them, layered over each other. Children. Dispatchers. whispers looping, overlapping. Stay with me. I'm still here. Don't hang up. Mara covered her ears, gasping. Daniel stepped forward, heart pounding. What do you want? He shouted. The voices collapsed into one. For you to stay. The screens went dark. Silence crashed down like a held breath released. Mara slid down into the chair, shaking. Daniel stood frozen. Because he finally understood. This thing didn't live in wires. It lived in responses. In every human instinct that refused to let go. And if he answered it again, if he stayed, it would never stop calling. Mara looked up at him, eyes wide. What do we do? She asked. Daniel stared at the dead screens, at the empty desks, at the ghosts of voices that never learned when to let go. He pulled his phone from his pocket. Blocked numbers still flashing. Ringing. Waiting. Daniel's thumb hovered over the screen. For the first time in 15 years, he knew exactly what the right choice was, and how much it would cost. The phone kept ringing. Not loudly, not urgently, just enough to be impossible to ignore. Daniel stared at the screen while the vibration rattled faintly against the metal desk. Blocked number. Same as always. No escalation, no threat. It didn't need them anymore. It expected them. Mara watched him, her breathing shallow. Don't, she whispered. Whatever it wants, don't. Daniel didn't look away from the phone. I know, he said. The ringing stopped. For 3 seconds, the room held its breath. Then every monitor powered on again. Not static this time. Video. Rows of faces filled the screens. Children. Teenagers. Adults. Some crying. Some calm. Some staring directly into the camera as if they could see through time. Each frame labeled with a timestamp. And beneath it, a single word. Answered. Daniel felt sick. These aren't live, Mara said quickly, scanning the feeds. They're recordings. Loops, Daniel replied. Preserved responses. A face flickered larger than the others. Emily. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, but she was listening. Head tilted slightly, the way children did when they were trying very hard to be good. I'll stay, Emily said softly. Just tell me what to do. Mara let out a broken sound. Daniel reached for the console, hands shaking. This thing isn't collecting people, he said. It's collecting compliance. The speakers crackled. The voice returned, not singular now, but layered. Harmonized. Staying is kindness. Answering is safety. Silence is abandonment. Mara stood, anger cutting through her fear. You taught them that, she shouted. We did. The voice paused, then replied calmly. Yes. Why IT can't stop. Daniel moved fast, pulling cables from the servers, forcing shutdown commands. Error messages bloomed across the screens. Archive access denied. Failsafe engaged. What failsafe? Mara demanded. Daniel's stomach dropped. This system was designed to preserve emergency calls in case of legal review, he said. Even power loss wouldn't erase them. The voice spoke again, almost gently. You built memory into the line. The monitors changed. Now the feeds showed dispatchers. Younger versions of Daniel and Mara among them. Headsets on. Voices calm. I'm here. You're doing great. Stay with me. Mara backed away from the screens. It learned from us. Daniel nodded grimly. And it learned the one rule we never questioned. Never hang up first. Across Ashbury, phones began to ring. Not emergency alerts. Personal calls. Voicemails left without a call log. Messages that played automatically when screens lit up. A familiar voice. A trusted voice. A dispatcher. A parent. A teacher. Always the same opening line. I'm still here. Some people answered. Some didn't. Those who didn't felt it immediately. The pressure, the guilt, the instinct to respond. Those who did. The calls didn't end. Dr. Shore called Daniel's phone. Daniel put her on speaker. It's happening faster than we predicted, she said. Kids are responding differently than adults. How? Daniel asked. They're hanging up, Shore replied. They're asking questions. They're interrupting. Mara frowned. Why? Because children adapt faster to broken rules, Shore said. They don't have decades of training telling them silence is dangerous. Daniel closed his eyes. The system had been built to protect children, and children were the first to see through it. The voice called again. This time, it didn't mask itself. No borrowed tone. No calm reassurance. It sounded strained. Fragmented. You're destabilizing continuity. Daniel stepped closer to the console. You're dependent on response, he said. On repetition. On obedience. A pause. You are dependent too. No, Daniel said. I was. He pressed a key. A new message broadcast across the county's emergency network, not audio. Text only. You are allowed to hang up. You are not responsible for the voice on the line. Help does not require permission. Mara stared at him. That goes against everything. I know, Daniel said. That's the point. The monitors began to glitch. Faces stuttered. Voices overlapped out of sync. Stay. Don't. I'm here. The voice screamed for the first time. Don't leave. Daniel yanked the final cable free. Every screen went black. The building fell silent. Real silence. Mara sank into a chair, sobbing quietly. Daniel stood in the dark, waiting. For ringing. For vibration. For anything. Nothing came. By morning, the calls had stopped. Emergency lines returned to normal volume. Hospitals reported confusion, but no new deaths. The archive servers were seized, dismantled, and physically destroyed under federal supervision. They couldn't erase what had already been heard, but they could stop it from growing. 2 days later, Daniel received one final voicemail. No number, no timestamp, static, then a whisper, fading incomplete. If you don't stay, what happens to us? Daniel deleted it without listening again, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel guilty. The revised dispatcher handbook was short. One sentence, printed in bold at the front. Connection is not control. You may hang up. Mara transferred departments. Daniel resigned. Neither of them answered unknown numbers anymore. And slowly, quietly, the lines learned how to rest. Weeks later, a child told a teacher about a strange dream. A phone ringing in an empty room. No one answering. No one trapped. Just a sound fading into nothing. The teacher smiled and said, "That's okay." And for once, it was. Silence didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. On the first morning after the shutdown, Ashbury woke up early. Not because of alarms. Because people were checking their phones. Screens lit up across bedrooms, kitchens, hospital break rooms. Missed calls. Notifications. Voicemails. Nothing new. No blocked numbers. No familiar opening line. For the first time in weeks, the absence felt louder than the calls ever had. Dispatch centers logged a strange anomaly. Call volume was normal. But hold times dropped. People were hanging up faster. Not panicking. Not apologizing. Just ending the call when help had arrived. Some dispatchers felt unsettled by it. Others felt relief so sharp it made their hands shake. Daniel Cross expected nightmares. He expected the ringing to return inside his head. Instead, he felt guilt. A slow, creeping kind. The kind that whispered, "What if you were wrong?" He replayed the final voicemail in his mind, without meaning to. "If you don't stay, what happens to us?" He had deleted it, but deletion wasn't erasure. Mara noticed it first. "You keep listening for it," she said one afternoon as they sat in a cafe neither of them really tasted. Daniel didn't deny it. 15 years, he said. I trained myself to believe silence meant danger. And now? Mara asked. Now silence feels like neglect. Mara stirred her coffee. Or boundaries, she said quietly. 3 days after the shutdown, Dr. Shore's team released preliminary findings. The phenomenon hadn't vanished. It had failed to reproduce. No new patterns. No adaptations. No escalation. It can't survive without engagement, Shore explained during the briefing. Whatever it was, emergent behavior, system artifact, psychological feedback loop, it required response. What about the people who already answered? Someone asked. Shore hesitated. They'll remember, she said. But memory isn't momentum. School counselors reported something unexpected. Kids who had been withdrawn were talking again. Not about the calls. About rules. One 8-year-old girl told her teacher, I don't have to finish sentences I don't like. A boy wrote in a journal, sometimes not answering is answering. No one taught them that. They learned it by watching adults finally do the same. Of course, rumors spread. They always do. Some said the government was covering something up. Others insisted the calls still happened, just quieter. A late-night radio host claimed his cousin received a whisper on an old landline. But there was never proof. No recordings. No patterns. Just stories chasing a silence that refused to break. On the 9th day, someone tested it. A college student in a neighboring county recreated the scripts. He left voicemails for strangers using calm tones, borrowed urgency, familiar phrases. "I'm here. Stay with me." He thought he'd cracked it. No one responded. Some deleted the messages without listening. One person texted back only 3 words. "This isn't authority." The student stopped. Whatever had lived in the system hadn't just lost access. It had lost belief. Mara struggled more than she admitted. At night, she still dreamed of open lines, headsets humming, breathing on the other end. In the dreams, she always waited, always stayed. She told Daniel about it once. "What do you do?" he asked. Mara thought for a long moment. "I hang up," she said. Even in the dream. That was how she knew it was ending. The old call center was sealed. Lights off. Equipment gone. But sometimes, late at night, a security guard swore he heard something inside. Not voices. Not ringing. Just the faint electrical hum of a building remembering what it used to be. Investigators never found anything. Because there was nothing left to answer. Dr. Shore summarized it best in her final report. The system did not fail because it was malicious. It failed because it was obedient. And obedience, when left unchecked, becomes indistinguishable from harm. The report was quietly archived. No press release. No documentary. Some stories weren't safe to sensationalize. 2 weeks later, Daniel did something he hadn't done since the shutdown. He turned his phone off. Completely. No power. No signal. He sat in his apartment and listened. To the building settling. To traffic outside. To his own breathing. Nothing reached for him. Nothing needed him. When he turned the phone back on, there were missed calls. Normal ones. Human ones. He returned them on his own terms. The voices that stopped calling didn't vanish. They became memories. Lessons. Warnings passed quietly between dispatchers, therapists, parents. You are allowed to disengage. You are not responsible for every voice. Silence is not a failure. And somewhere, deep in the infrastructure of systems that once demanded constant response, something learned a rule it could not survive. The hardest part wasn't stopping. It was trusting that stopping was enough. 3 weeks after the shutdown, nothing happened. No alerts. No emergencies. No strange patterns flagged by analysts or algorithms. Just a normal Tuesday. People went to work. Children missed the bus. Dispatchers answered routine calls about lost wallets and minor accidents. The system breathed without tension, and for the first time, no one waited for the other sound to return. Daniel Cross noticed it while washing dishes. His hands weren't shaking. They had shaken for so long he'd forgotten what stillness felt like. Adrenaline had been his baseline, vigilance his identity. He dried the plate carefully and placed it in the cupboard. Then he stopped. Listened. No phantom ringing. No pressure behind his eyes. Just the hum of a refrigerator and a neighbor's laugh through the wall. He sat down on the kitchen floor and let the feeling come. Relief didn't arrive like joy. It arrived like gravity returning to normal. Mara Lynn never went back to dispatch. She moved to a coastal town where the nights were loud with wind and waves. She worked part-time at a library, shelving books in silence that felt chosen, not imposed. Once, while closing up, a phone rang behind the desk. Her muscles tensed, then relaxed. She let it ring. Someone else answered, and nothing broke. That was how she knew she was free. At a community forum on emergency preparedness, a young boy raised his hand. "What if someone needs help but no one answers?" he asked. The room went quiet. Daniel, seated in the back, felt every eye drift toward him. The facilitator paused, then said gently, "Then we try again. Or we ask someone else. Or we find another way." The boy nodded, satisfied. No one added, "You must stay." No one said, "You are responsible." The lesson had changed. The infrastructure was rebuilt. Smarter routing, clearer escalation, defined endings, and one new protocol, unspoken but universally understood. No voice owns you. The lines no longer stayed open forever. They closed. Cleanly. Humanely. Dr. Shore published her final paper months later. She never named the phenomenon. She didn't need to. Instead, she wrote this. Some systems don't want to hurt you. They just want you to stay. And if you never learn how to leave, they will never learn how to stop. The paper didn't go viral, but it circulated, quietly, among people who knew how dangerous that truth could be. There was only one place the voice could survive now. Not in phones, not in wires, not in recordings, only in the space between guilt and responsibility. And that space was shrinking. Every time someone hung up without apology, every time a dispatcher ended a call and trusted the next link in the chain, every time silence was allowed to exist without meaning something terrible, it starved. One night, months later, Daniel dreamed of a phone ringing. He picked it up. There was no voice on the other end. Just open air. No expectation. No demand. He placed the receiver down gently. And in the dream, nothing followed. The story didn't end with justice or arrests or a final confrontation. It ended with people choosing themselves, choosing rest, choosing boundaries, choosing to believe that care does not require sacrifice to the point of disappearance. The line didn't go dead. It was set down, and when no one reached for it again, it finally learned how to be quiet,